Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with HuntPrimitive. We're going to do a much quicker and updated version of the cane arrow build along. So stick with us. We're going to go through this pretty darn fast to try to save you a lot of time, but we're going to show you how to make some really quality cane or bamboo arrows. This video has very similar content to the other one. It's just going to be a lot faster and a lot more concise in general. So first we're going to start off with, I'm going to use a propane torch and just back it down till it's got, I don't know, maybe an inch or two is worth of flame. And then I've got seasoned RiverCane shafts or bamboo. If you need that information, I have a video on cutting RiverCane or bamboo shafts. So once you have the shafts cut, you can look it up on my channel. Just type in HuntPrimitive RiverCane shafts or cutting or whatever. It'll pop up. Let them season in about a month or two. And then we're going to start heating these up and bending them straight. And so I just look down, find a spot that looks like it's probably the most crooked, and then I start heating it up. Now I don't want this thing to catch on fire. I want it to just get a little toasty golden brown, enough that it starts to bend easy, and then I bump it into shape, tweak it until it starts to cool, and then I can go on to the next spot. And I can go up and down this shaft and just straighten out every place that is crooked. Now a lot of people have asked me, and they say, well, do you straighten on the nodes or in between the nodes, or do you start with one first? And the answer is you have to straighten all of it. Any place that's crooked, on the node, in between the node, close to the node, it doesn't matter. It all needs straightened, and there's no order in which you have to straighten it. So you'll notice too that sometimes I'll jump from an area while I'm letting it cool, and then I'll start working on another section. And so this way I can really straighten these shafts out a lot faster, as opposed to going in a purely linear fashion. So I'm going to do that all the way up and down this shaft. And again, you're going to treat bamboo and RiverCane species pretty much exactly the same. And they're going to straighten out for you really nice once they're seasoned. So I got a few more minutes to go on this, and then we can move on to the next step. But last note on this is, if you straighten an area and it's not as straight as you want, it does not hurt to straighten it again. So go ahead, reheat it, and bump it around straight until you get it as straight as you like. And I know a lot of people have said an arrow doesn't need to be very straight to fly well, and that's kind of true, but I have also found that the straighter your shafts, the better your arrows typically are. Boy, I got that one. Holy smokes, I got that one. Once your shafts are straightened, you can head over and do some spine testing if you're going to spine test. You don't necessarily have to if you build your bow to be very, very forgiving, and early people didn't spine test. But if you are going to spine test, we're going to show you how to do that. And also, that information that I just mentioned is in my new book, The Secrets and Science of Building Bows and Arrows. And we'll be sure to drop a link down to that as well. There's going to be a lot of nuanced stuff in that book that you're going to want to know. But anyway, I take a straightened shaft, and I like to leave it full length, really as long as I can within reason. And the reason for that is I can test the spine at one end, and I'll show you how to run the spine tester in a second. But if it's too light or too stiff, if it's too light, I can slide it down and essentially make it heavier, because the cane or bamboo shaft is naturally tapered. So if I always have the big end on my right hand side and always the nock end over here, so I can move this around and actually get the spine range that I'm looking for. Okay, so now what I have is I already have an arrow shaft that I have a nock cut in, just so you can use this as a visual. You don't have to do your nocks first. I typically do them later, but this one is cut to length and it's spined. But I want to show you how to use the spine tester properly for cane and bamboo. So how I like to orient it is the first node branch that comes off the shaft. And let's grab another shaft here and I'll show you. These are the nodes, obviously. Now the node branch, you're going to see a little spot where the branches kind of grow out or are going to grow out, and typically they're opposite from one another. So there's going to be one on this side, and then there's going to be one on this side, and they're typically parallel. They're not just random all the way around. Okay, and that's very important, because what we're going to do, this one, the first node is actually really far down. A lot of them you're going to find are up here much closer. So just kind of keep that in mind. But how I orient is that node branch, I face that directly to me, or directly away from me. It doesn't seem to matter too much as long as the nodes face up and down while the arrow is on the string. So that means on the spine tester it needs to face sideways, and so now you can see, because what we're doing is we're going to be bending and deflecting the shaft on the spine tester, which would be perpendicular to the bow. Okay, so you need a better explanation on that, I suppose you can listen to it again, but that's not that important. I can save you the trouble by basically showing you that the nock is already cut in here, and the nock is laying flat as if the string was going this way, as opposed to if it was on a bow, it would be this way, right? So we're going to orient this so the node is parallel with the nock. So this way, when it's on the string, the node branch faces either directly up or directly down. And again, it doesn't seem to matter too much which direction you go. So when you set up the shaft on the spine tester, I like to take the first node and face it directly towards me, because I can see it better facing towards me than I can away from me. And then I zero out my spine tester. We always start at 0, and then you hang the weight, and it doesn't matter what spine tester you use. They don't even make this one anymore, so don't even worry about asking what brand it is, because you can't get it. It's a really old one, but you can get about any of them. And then on mine, we measure at 26 inches, which is the outside bar, and then this one says 60 to 65, roughly about 62 pound spine is where this one is. So I would be able to know that this bow would be safe, or this arrow would be safe to shoot on, say, a 60 to 65 weight, or even ones that are less spine, depending on how picky your bow is. But that's pretty much how you're going to set that up to run your spine testing. So again, the nodes facing you, also where the nock is going to be, the nodes are going to be up and down. Okay, that's the important part. Now remember, when we cut the nock in, it's going to be parallel, in line with the nodes. Okay, so I hold the node directly up whenever I saw in the nock. Now you can use a bandsaw, you can use a hacksaw, and then we're going to widen it up with a file, and we'll show you that in a second. So I like to nock to go down roughly about 3/8 of an inch. You can do a little less, a little more, whatever you like. And then if I'm using a more modern string, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch file and gently file this out, following that kerf line. If I'm using a sinew string or a larger string in general, I'll use a 5/32 chainsaw file. But I come in from both directions just to make sure that I'm following it straight. I do it at a little bit of an angle, I do it flat, and I'm just kind of rounding that out, just like that. All right, once your nock is done, you're going to notice that if you take a back of your knife and you run it, there's little spots that hang up on these nodes. So take a sharp knife, and then I don't worry about whittling them. I just lay it flat, and I go all the way around it, just to clean those up. And I'll clean all of them up, so when you draw it back on the bow, it's not catching on either the handle or your hand. It's very, very distracting when you draw back an arrow and you get some resistance and you feel those, and it'll really distract you during the shot. So we want to make sure that we just clean these up. And then, this is the last one. And then I take a little bit of sandpaper, and the area that the fletching is going to go, I go ahead and sand it. And this is either 100 or 120 grit sandpaper is usually pretty good. The cane has a waxy natural finish on it that glues do not like to stick to. So it always helps to just sand them up. Then I'm going to come to the inside of my nock, and I'm going to sand all the square edges that are sharp. So I just want to dull those edges up so they don't wear through the string faster. Then I'm going to sand the squared outside edges. We're going to sand all of those round, and it only takes but just a minute. And then if you do want to do any sort of painting or crusting, come down far enough where you want the painting to be, and make sure you sand that waxy finish off of the shaft in those areas as well. Now before painting or finishing a shaft, If you want to look it down it one more time and make any more straightening corrections, now's a great time. Then you can come through and you can sand these nodes down a little bit smoother as you see fit. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. There's always going to be a little bit of bumps and wiggles, but for the most part, you want them pretty darn nice, just like this shaft right here. On another note, if you want to see how I make a purely Stone Age arrow, we actually have those videos on this channel as well. Just look for HuntPrimitive Stone Age arrow build, or if you actually watch the longer film From the Earth, you'll be able to actually watch going through building everything with just the stone tools in that video. All right, now you do not need any sort of finish on your arrow. If you want to use a finish, again, a spray lacquer works really well for me. Cane arrows, typically you don't have to have a finish. Now, on the pointed end, opposite of the nock, we're going to want to fill this section full. You do not need to fill the back nock section because we're going to wrap below this with sinew, and that's all the reinforcement it needs. Now on the point end, because we want a little bit harder backstop for a stone point to go on, then we're going to want to fill this solid. Now if you have an empty internodal chamber, which would be in between the two nodes, right, and it starts here and it happened to cut, then you can just fill this. You can whittle a stick, plug it, you can cut skewers like I used to do in the old video. Any of that filling with sand stuff, don't even mess with that. I talk about that at great lengths in the Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery. It's absolutely not worth it, and it actually is going to cost you penetration in the long run because you can't thin the end of your shaft. So that's the reason I do this. Now if you have a node that's close, I'm going to take a 1/4 inch drill bit, or any drill bit size that really fits for you. I use a 1/4 inch dowel to plug this, so I'm going to very, very gently drill that out to the node. Then I'm going to even gently, more gently, go through the node so I don't split the arrow. And if it does split, it's not always the end of the world. You can glue your plug in and tie it back together. But I typically don't split them, just like that. So now that's glued out. And now I'm gonna plug this with a 1/4 inch dowel rod. So now the 1/4 inch dowel rods are a little too thick to go in here. So I'm gonna just sand this down ever so gently so it slides in nice and easy. You want a firm fit, but not too tight that it splits your shaft. Perfect, and you want it to seat all the way at the bottom of where you drilled out to. And now we're gonna take a little wood glue and we're gonna dribble just a little bit down the hole. And then we're gonna go ahead and put just a little smear on the outside of the dowel and slide it down in. And I cut it so I had a little bit of room to hang on to the outside, but it's already seated in there pretty good. Usually I leave it full length and cut it later, but it was easier to show you on camera. And now I'll just trim the end of that off. All right, so now we're going to teach you how to make a fletching. Now a couple notes on the fletching is when you can use any side of the wing that you want. They can be left or right wing so long as you only use the same side per arrow. So every arrow has to have either all left wing or all right wing, and that has to do with the way that the arrow cups, because that's going to make a big difference when it fletches. You're going to get some wonky flight potentially if you interchange left and right wing on the same arrow. Okay, so now we're going to start off with a turkey feather. Now if you want to use any of the commercial feather grinders or even fletching jigs, that's perfectly fine, but we're not going to be doing those in this video because I'm going to teach you how to kind of do it at home where it's going to be a little easier for you. So it's up to you, I guess, what you want to use, but I'm going to go right down the center vein of this feather. There's a natural line, and I'm not necessarily trying to cut it right off the bat. I'm actually coming in here and lightly scoring it and punching it with the tip of my knife. Definitely helps to have a sharp knife or a thin knife like a razor knife or a paring knife. I work with this one all the time, so I don't mind it. Okay, once I've kind of scarred that, come along and then split it out the rest of the way. Now there's another method of grabbing and peeling, but that leaves you with a very, very, very thin section of feather to work with, and it's not my favorite way of doing it. So I prefer to split them just like this. So we're going to be careful, actually kind of started to break that one just a little bit. So pop that. Now sometimes you can get 2 fletchings out of these, sometimes just 1. What I'm going to do is trim it down, just show you how to do 1. So I'm just going to do a random trim, but I'm going to leave it longer than I am looking for as of right now. You can measure your fletching and make them whatever size you want. I like to work in about the 5-inch range for my fletching. So now I'm going to take my knife and I'm very gently just trimming the quill down a little bit. You don't have to go absolutely crazy because we're going to use some sandpaper in a minute. But we're thinning it down. It definitely helps to have that sharp knife, razor sharp. Okay, then I'm going to take my scissors, and there's a lot of lip sticking out on the inside of this quill. And since there's so much quill sticking out, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm actually going to trim the side of that quill until it kind of thins out a little bit. Doesn't have to be super thin. I just want to knock a little bit of mass off that. Now ideally we want this feather to be able to stand up and lay really flat. Okay, now this is technically good enough for most scenarios, but this is how you're going to make it better. You're going to get 2 blocks of wood and you're going to sandwich it in between so the quill lays flat. Takes a second to align it. So the quill lays flat, and then we're going to squeeze the 2 blocks together. We're going to take our sandpaper, and you got to hold it pretty tight because if it's loose, it's going to push that feather back and forth, and it's going to really rough up your feather. So squeeze it pretty tight. And just go ahead and sand it smooth. And then you'll notice how nice and smooth and flat it is. And you'll be able to set it right on a table and it'll stand right up on end. Okay, so then measure your fletching out. I'm just going to eyeball it on this one because it doesn't really matter a whole lot. I like it right about there. I'll trim it to length. And then I like to come up about 3/8 of an inch and trim it there. 3/8 of an inch here. Now a lot of people, I'll explain I guess this in a second, I'll cut this angle first to show you. I'm going to leave it a little bit bigger for now, but I just use a nice sharp pair of scissors. If you want to use again on any of the modern choppers or any of that stuff, go for it. You can use them. I'm just showing you how to do it without having to buy all of that. Now a lot of people love the look of a fletching that sticks out like this, right? Problem is you fletch these vibrate during flight and your arrow is going to buzz. Now if you're shooting targets don't get out of the way. If you're shooting at animals, you're going to want to cut these. So that's why I like more of a shield style. So I will trim these back more like this. Okay, now I'm actually going to trim this a little bit thinner yet. Just about like that. Doesn't have to be perfect, but that's what I'm looking for right there for a fletching. And like I said, you can typically, well, if you got a good spot of table, but with the curvature, you just want to make sure that when you put it on the shaft, it's going to be able to stand straight up and flat. If it's leaning really heavily to one side, you need to flatten that quill out a little bit better. So go ahead and cut 2 more that are just like this one, and we'll be ready to start fletching. Alright, so we're ready to fletch, and I do want to tell you that I switched over to, you're going to notice that the fletchings are a little bit different. I showed you how to cut them and trim them the way I used to. Now I do a modified commercially cut, like I chop them into the shape that I want, and that's for the specific customers' arrows that I make. But at least I showed you how you can cut them with just scissors at home if you'd like. Now we're going to fletch this arrow. This is not exactly how I do this for customers anymore. I have a much larger commercial operation at this point, but again, this is what I'm trying to teach you so you can do this at home without anything extra special. So I'm going to cut about a 3-foot section of artificial sinew. It's the waxed nylon artificial sinew, and the reason that I'm going to use the waxed nylon is because it's not going to stick. Now if you want this to be permanent, you can use something that's not waxed. You can actually wrap this on and leave it, and that would be fine. But you could use something else that would be more permanent, use your imagination. But what we're going to do is wrap it with the artificial sinew, then we're going to hold it down until the fletching's dry, then we're going to take it off and wrap it with real sinew. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start perpendicular to my nock and lay one of these fletchings down. Then I'm going to get a couple wraps on there quick, make sure it's centered exactly where I want it, and I'm going to hold it tight. And then I'm going to kind of eyeball where the next fletching is going to go. And then the third. It doesn't have to be perfect yet, put 2 or 3 wraps on it. Then, while you're still holding it, you can kind of peel and push these around a little bit to really line them out exactly where you want. Really evenly space them. Spend a couple minutes and get them right. Look down it. Get to where you're pretty happy with it. Then go ahead and put a couple more turns on it, nice and tight. Make sure they hold into place. Okay? Now, that wax will already kind of hold itself on there. You don't have to do a whole lot. Now I'm going to take a toothpick with some wood glue. And I'm going to pull this fletching out very gently with my other fingers. And I'm actually going to wipe a little bit of wood glue on the underside of each of these fletchings. All the way. I don't necessarily want to crease that quill. And I know you guys can't hardly see what I'm doing. I'll show you on this one a little bit better. But I'm just wiping that wood glue on the underside. Now the reason you're going to want to do wood glue is because super glue in this instance actually dries too fast. So by the time you were trying to wrap these would have all been setting already. With the fletchings all glued into place, now I'm going to hold these and I'm going to, as evenly as possible, go in between the veins of the feathers in a spiral pattern. Now, if you decided you wanted to leave it like this, you absolutely could. You could just kind of burn the ends of the artificial sinew and put some glue on it and leave them. But we're not going to when it's all done. But anyway, I usually space these out about, I don't know, anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. Honestly, I guess averaging about 3/8 like we do. And I want to kind of pull it a little bit tight. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect as long as it's not distorting your feather. So about 1/4 of the way through or 1/3 of the way through, I'm going to stop, snug it up, straighten the feathers out. And the reason you want to take your time, if you don't evenly space, it's going to really fray out your feather, which obviously you don't want. So once you get pretty quick at it, like this, you'll just be able to come right in, make a correction if you need to. And again, straighten it out because you want the cupping to helical around, which I'll show you in a second. So you just kind of want to check it, snug everything back up. I'm not worried about making this look perfect again because I'm going to remove it. If I was going to leave this permanently, I would spend a little bit more time trying to make it absolutely perfect. And now that I've got this wrapped, I'm going to put a few wraps, and now I can adjust my feathers by basically dragging them around wherever I need them to be. So now's where really get your feathers aligned, and all these wrappings are going to hold it together. Now you can make straight fletched arrows, but what you're going to find is when you look down actually the point is probably going to be easier for you guys to look down. When you look down the shaft, the inside that's cupped, the inside of the feather, you want that wind to catch the cupped side. So that means if your quill closest to the nock is here, you're going to orient over to this side if it cups this way. Now if it was the opposite feather, it would cup the other way. But when you just imagine the air coming through and you want it to hit the cupped side, which is going to make this arrow rotate just like this. So now just take a few minutes, straighten these out. This one looks really nice. And then you can let this dry for an hour or so until that wood glue is nice and set. And I'm not going to do anything else with this other than I might put another couple wraps so it doesn't unwind, but I don't need to tie it off because, like I said, we're going to take it off. All right, now if you were going to leave it just like this, you actually can. You don't have to take it off and wrap it with sinew, but you do need to reinforce under the nock. So then I'll take another piece of artificial sinew, and you could have actually used the same piece and wrapped it first, but I'm going to pinch a little bit on, and I don't want to mound it up. I want to put them nice and neat stacks next to each other. So wrap this nice and neat. You don't have to go all the way down the nock, but again, about 3/8 to 1/2 inch is typically enough. Then, if you wanted to finish it off, all you have to do is do another wrap, but hold a loop out. You don't need to tie it, just tuck it under and pull it. And then all you would have to do is trim this edge and then burn it with a lighter, and that would hold that down. Then you could come back later and actually coat over the top of this with super glue. It's not perfect because it's waxed, but it will actually last quite a long time. So if you want to just use artificial sinew and finish it out just like this, you could. But like I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to use some real sinew, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And when this dries, we're going to remove the artificial sinew. All right, once it's been dried, I'm just going to go ahead and just gently unwrap it. And that's why I like the waxed artificial sinew, because it doesn't stick to the wood glue. So even if you have glue on it, it's going to come off nice and easy. So just go ahead and whoop, spin that right off. Now I'm going to take real sinew. I like to use it chewed. You can soak it if you want. I like the properties of it better when it's actually chewed. And I'm going to straighten out a nice little piece of it here. And then I'm going to start right on the nock. And I'm going to wrap that nock first. And I don't want to mound a whole bunch of it up, but I want to get a good pull, relatively tight, and I just want nice, neat stacks and next to each other. Okay, just like that. And so then I can get a few wraps, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip ahead right to the quill, and then I'm actually going to wrap back towards the nock. So this way I cover the nock, and I got the nock area reinforced, and then I also covered the quill. And it's okay if there's a little bit of space in between there, but you can also wrap the entire thing if you want. I'm going to take another piece of sinew, and I'm going to hold that down and then wrap just a little bit over the quill and then under the quill, just to make a nice smooth transition, so when you're shooting it, it doesn't lift a quill. And it doesn't need to be tied. Sinew doesn't need to be tied. It's got its own glues, and it'll hold itself down. And you can let this dry for a little bit, or you can coat it with glue right away. I'm going to go ahead and glue it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little bit of glue on the inside of the quill, and I'm a nice tight smear up each one, just to give it a little extra reinforcement. If you have a wide fletching line, you may want to glue both sides. Mine sits pretty flat, and then I put a couple dabs there, and then I'm going to take my finger and just run it around all the sinew, going with the same direction that the sinew goes, obviously, so you don't unwind it. And then I'll run my finger up the quill to gather the rest of it. And now that is finished and ready to dry. And when it's ready to dry, you can either test shoot it without a point, or we can put a point on, and I'll show you that in a second. Now I'm going to show you how to put a field point on the end of this arrow, and then we'll put a stone point on the end of another arrow. And so I use a bench sander. You might be familiar with a taper tool. A lot of times on this cane, you'll probably find that it won't fit in your taper tool, and it doesn't cut cane as well as you think it would. So again, I'm going to use this and just kind of eyeball the pitch that I want so this can slide on. But you're also going to notice that the point is a smaller diameter. I'm using a 70 grain field point. You can use a larger tip glue-on point if you would like, but this one's larger, so I'm going to use this side. I'm actually going to taper it out. I'm going to barrel taper this down and then taper this, and then we're going to glue it on. And so then you can see that that actually fits Pretty darn nice. Then I just like to glue it on with 5-minute epoxy if that's what I'm going to do. So I'll put an equal amount, I'll stir it up, stick it on, let that dry, and then that's pretty good to go and it's ready to practice. Alright guys, we have a completely finished cane arrow here. It's just drying and then it's ready to go. So everything's glued together, tips on, and then this is ready to go out and target practice. This one was 50 to 55 spine. So hopefully that this video helped you go through the process of making your own cane or bamboo arrows at home. And we're going to do another video shortly on putting a stone point on, so we're going to do an updated hafting video as well, so make sure you keep an eye out for that one. And also the new book, The Secrets and Science of Building Bows and Arrows. It's different than The Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery. That talks a lot about the science and the history of archery, and they really pair very, very well together. But the new book is specific to building primitive bows and arrows. So be sure to check that out if this stuff really interests you. But anyway, hope this gets you into building your own cane and bamboo arrows.